Are ghosts real? Several recent encounters suggest there might be more things in heaven and earth than we can dream of.
So are werewolves just a Hollywood creation, or do half-man, half-wolf creatures really exist? Now, tonight, we kick off our Conspiracy Theory Month series, which was a...
The legend of the vampire actually goes back for centuries, and it exists in some form or another in almost every culture. In fact, some people believe the first vampire story was in the Bible.
Well, for decades, only crackpots and crazy people believed in UFOs. That's what I thought anyway. And then in recent years, it turns out that governments have been taking them seriously all along.
Try and clear up an ancient mystery with the help of a prominent veterinarian who says she can prove that Bigfoot exists and that he's related to all of us.
New reports, 5 pilots coming forward over the weekend saying they've had multiple mid-air encounters with high-flying, fast-moving objects.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Celestial Oddities Pair of Normal Guys podcast. I am your host, Garrett Jagaman.
I'm your
Your go-host.
I'm your go-host, Daniel James.
Well, hello, go-host. How you doing tonight, brother?
Go-host with the most.
That's it. Well, folks, if you're listening out there, we have another great episode planned for you. Make sure you click the like, share, and follow button from whatever platform you're listening, whether it's iTunes or iHeartRadio, Spotify, Deezer, Spreaker, CastBox, Google Play, Amazon, you name it, we are on it. So listen where you feel most comfortable. Make sure you click those buttons, though. The more that you do that, more it moves us up the podcast community rankings, more people that discover the show, keeps you in the loop with new episodes as they air, and allows you the key to our past archived episodes. We have something for absolutely everyone in the paranormal and supernatural, so make sure you check it out. You can listen wherever you feel most comfortable, whether you want to stream it live, stream it after the fact, or download it to your device for on the go. We have that capability, but if you do want to talk to us during the show, ask questions to any guests we have or to Daniel and myself, you can do that through Spreaker.com or the Spreaker app. That is Spreaker. That is the company that we host through. We do bring you shows every other Thursday night, 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Well, actually 8 to 9, sometimes 9:30, I should say. Every other week, Thursday night, we talk about the best in supernatural and the metaphysical in the, paranormal fields out there. So we have a great episode planned for you tonight. Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we're jumping into tonight?
Tonight's episode I'm very excited about because I'm going to pop off on this one. It's about the Tartarian Mud Flood of the 1800s. And what I've done for you guys tonight is I've written a formal lecture that I'm going to read that's based on all of my research and the things that I have an awareness of in sort of like the alternative sort of communities, and I'm going to lay it out for you guys the way that I see it. And then Garrett and I are going to go ahead and pop off on a discussion, and we want to make sure that we give you guys an equal platform, an equal playing field to make your own decisions and see how you feel about all of this information, because it's going to be a really big data dump tonight.
Absolutely. I can't wait to jump into it, discuss different options, ideas, possibilities, and really just pick into this odd and fascinating thing that's popped up recently in the last few years, as a lot of people have been talking about.
Yeah, it's really interesting, man. So I can get started, Garrett, whenever you want. I don't know if you have any thoughts, feelings, or concerns before I go here, or other than that, I can just dive right in.
No, dive right in, man. We'll go ahead and jump back and forth afterwards.
All right, guys. So check it out. I'm no expert on this topic, but I am an expert in some of the things that it pertains to. I'm a big fan of conspiracy theories, alternative information. I'm part of the Truther Networks. I'm somebody that questions everything. I look at things from that alternative perspective. And being relatively new to this topic, it's been kind of popping up in my reality the past couple weeks, and I hadn't really taken much of an interest in it as it came into my awareness until it came across another interview that I was listening to recently that was just eye-opening, absolutely eye-opening, and it inspired me to do my own research and do my own investigations and my own meditations on this. And what I've done for you, my friends, is I prepared a story for you about the Tartarian Mud Flood. Okay, guys, so here we go. If you research the Tartarian Mud Flood of the 1800s, you will not find much at all. And what you do find will be heavily simplified and watered down. To summarize, it's about a society that used advanced architecture and seemed to have its own way of doing things located outside of Russia and Europe. It had colonies of this unknown society, and what I would call the suppressors, they would actually have a term for this society. It's called the Old Country, and that's the way that it's phrased. So it's said that the society or country was suddenly buried by a mud flood, and evidence of this can be found all over the world, actually, of buried buildings and cities. Strange, but it doesn't really sound terribly fascinating, does it? Okay, so let's say, for example, there is some city or society that maybe was a little bit strange, and then some cataclysm happened where they were subject to what's called as a mud flood, and then we don't know much about it other than that. Well, that's all that we're really given. If you research it, even if you use alternative search engines like DuckDuckGo, it's really hard to find more than that basic summary. That's when I did my own research, so here we go. The watered-down public explanation of this Tartarian society, we only have that much. There's a reason for it. Let me tell you about the real Tartaria, okay? We're going to talk about who these people really were and why they were wiped from history, and no one has been taught about their existence. So what we're dealing with here is a highly advanced race of maybe a hybrid human, in a sense, or what I would call a breakaway civilization. Breakaway civilizations are basically a race of beings, either human or hybrid human, that may originate from Earth but live inside the Earth in tunnel systems, or they may live underneath the ocean in biomes, which we've discussed in the past, or they could also maybe originate on Earth in some fashion but live off planet now. They commonly have alternative and advanced technology and also may appear somewhat differently than us. For example, for a breakaway civilization, think Atlantis, think ancient Lemuria or ancient Agartha. If you've ever heard of those civilizations, that's an example of what I mean by breakaway civilization. But only Tartarian would be much more modern or contemporary in terms of like the 17 and the 1800s. So with the Tartarians, let's see, where do we start? Well, the Tartarians were an extremely old and advanced civilization that wasn't just local to Europe or Russia, but they actually had colonies all over the world. And the evidence of their existence starts with their architecture. The Tartarians were responsible for a lot of what we would call Greco-Roman style buildings. And that Greco-Roman style we actually still have today all over the place. An example of this style is in our post offices and our capitol buildings for all of our states in the United States. There's a very distinct look to our capitol buildings and the post offices with their cement and their stone architecture. Anything with sort of stone pillars or dome-shaped towers inside, it's said that they used the power of light and sound to manipulate earth and cement in the same way that the pyramids were built in Egypt. So we all know that the pyramids were not built with manpower alone. The mathematics and the physics of those structures were far too complex for physical manpower. So we have an example of that with what their structures looked like in terms of that Greco-Roman style, as we still have this style within our buildings today. Now, a strange thing about their architecture is that many of their cities were actually built in the shape of a star. And you can find images of this on the internet, of these star-shaped cities on old maps, and also aerial shots of the star-shaped walls as well. So when looking at older maps, you kind of got to dig for these, but you'll see in the bottom left or the bottom right-hand corner of these maps of the Earth, you'll see these strange, like literally star-shaped structures and societies. Well, I did some research on it, and it's easier to find on DuckDuckGo than it is Google. But you can find sort of like, when I say star-shaped, I mean the stone walls that border these small towns and cities are actually shaped like a star. And I don't exactly know what, mainstream media tells us the reasoning for those shaped buildings or structures are, but they were part of this Tartarian sort of society in terms of their architecture. So moving on here, the next thing to note is many of their buildings had taller, arched doorways, similar to what you'd kind of see in a church. And they're bigger than anything that we would need today that would lead us to assume that they may have actually been taller than us as well. When their structures were found and investigated, one strange thing that was discovered about their houses was that they didn't have any toilets, and that their fireplaces didn't have any smokestacks, but that they were just solid steel compartments. So why is this? It's pretty strange, right?
Absolutely.
Turns out that the Tartarians were masters in steam. They were also masters in renewable energy and plasma manipulation. Now, bear with me, guys. I know we're getting a little bit sci-fi here, but stay with me. A little lecture about plasma energy. Well, we're all plasmatic beings ourselves. When we eat food, medical science tells us that we are absorbing the vitamins, the minerals, and the proteins from it. But what we're actually absorbing is the raw energy, similar to the way that a plant needs sunlight. An example of this, or the proof, is in black lights. So forensic science will use black lights to find bodily fluids like semen, urine, and blood. And it's because our bioluminescence is in our bodily fluid. Well, it's said that the Tartarians were actually absorbing plasmatic energy for their nutrients, which is why they didn't have toilets in their houses. Okay, so to summarize that point, people found buried houses and buried cities in mud underneath the ground. And when they were investigating the houses, strange telltales were that their door frames were much larger than ours, they didn't have toilets, and their fireplaces were made out of steel with no opening or ventilation system. So, sticking with our technologies, it's said that they mastered steam and were using it as an energy source to power things. They had things like flying vehicles, moving sidewalks, and they also showcased wireless energy. Okay, so there are pictures of them having giant domes, giant light domes, all over their tower structures and their buildings, and that they had no power cables hooked up to them, but they put off a massive, wattage of light with no direct energy source. We're talking like some Tesla technology here. Now, we know Tesla's technology was very unique and creative, and that it was also heavily suppressed. I'm going to circle back on how that connects to these guys in a minute. A side note that I want to address here is that they had steam flying structures and possibly even flying cities, which people have reported seeing from time to time in the sky. I also think that much of our steampunk culture was not only inspired by the Industrial Revolution, but it was also very much inspired by the Tartarian society, who may have had that very metal, leather, sort of brass, strange aesthetic as well. That's just a little hunch of mine, because, when you look at movies and mainstream entertainment, there's always these depictions of these sort of steampunk societies that don't exactly look like it did during our Industrial Revolution, but looked like it was inspired by it. And I often think I have my own theories and my beliefs that in terms of entertainment and television and movies, nothing is really fictional. Everything exists and comes from somewhere, whether we know about it or not. But that's another tangent. So listen, we know that they may have been taller than us. We know that their structures and their architecture still stands today. We know that they used an unknown energy and steam technology. We know that they may have had a more advanced way for sustenance as well. We know that they had colonies all over the world with star-shaped cities. So then what happened to them, and why were they erased from our history? Well, like I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of alternative information. I'm in the truther communities. I'm a big fan of conspiracy theories. And part of my beliefs within those certain sort of structures is that a lot of our reality is kept secret from the public, or what I call like sort of civilian knowledge. We're talking about aliens, Bigfoot, healing technology, and free renewable energy. I think all of these things exist. There's enough proof and evidence out there and personal accounts for us to sort of subscribe to that depending on your beliefs. But free energy is a really big one here. Every time an inventor has come out with a new form of free renewable energy, they are totally shut down. Everything is taken from them and confiscated, and they have oftentimes been killed and found dead, or they've been threatened to be silent. Now, the same goes for cures for cancer. Apparently, our leadership doesn't really want people fully cured from disease, and they also don't want us to have free energy. Now, the disappearance of their society, it comes around a similar time frame when electricity was going to start getting turned into a service that people had to pay for. Just something to think about. So it's said that not only were the Tartarians using free energy, but they were also interstellar. Okay? It's said that in the late 1800s, there was a mysterious mud flood that suddenly covered up their whole city, but not just near Europe and Russia and anywhere that Google tells you that they existed, but there's evidence of it happening everywhere, and also all at once, as if it were planned in a synchronized attack. The whole Tartarian civilization, quote unquote, buried. So what do we do with evidence that we don't want leaking to someone? Well, we bury it, both figuratively and, in this case, literally. The evidence is buried. In closing, I think there was a real steampunk breakaway civilization that was possibly at war, or possibly attacked by a rival faction, or whatever you want to call them. Some people call them the Cabal. I just call them, the overseers of our society. That they covered up and they wiped from the face of the earth this Tartarian society. I think that a similar technology was used to form, and this is my opinion here, a similar technology was used that forms and moves stone and cement, similar to the way that they built their structures, similar to the way that the pyramids were built, using sound, light, and vibration. I think it was actually that technology was used as a type of warfare, and I think that it was used to, in a sense, liquefy stone, rock, and dirt, and that it could be used directly to literally bury these cities in a very short amount of time, and that attack could have been synchronized to happen anywhere that there were sort of congregations or clusters of these Tartarian societies all over the world. Now, I don't want to get too weird on you guys if I haven't enough already, but I'm also a subscriber in the concept of DEWs. That's direct energy weapons. And if you subscribe to this alternative weaponry and this type of warfare, then you can actually use light, sound, and vibration to not only densify matter, but you can also liquefy it and move it. You can sort of influence it. And it sounds crazy and far-fetched just because we don't see people doing that within our science now, but it doesn't mean that these things don't exist. The same way that alternative medicine and renewable energy is suppressed from civilians. I think that's how these cities were buried. I think that because these Tartarians had technology that for both sustenance, probably medicinally, probably warfare, probably because they were interstellar, and because they used free renewable energy, they were a threat to whoever has a total stranglehold over our medical system, over our military system, over our political system, and over our energy system. I mean, electricity, let's look at it like this. Did you guys know that it's illegal to own a house that's off the grid? In the sense that even if you buy a property, if you live on it, if you physically live on it, you're supposed to have it hooked up to the electrical system. and paying for an energy service. That to me is very strange. Why you can't own your own property and live on it off the grid, that it's technically illegal. And people fight for a lot of different sovereign laws to make sure that they can live on their property off the grid if they choose to, but that they're really, really sort of backed into hooking themselves up to the grid. Now, I'm not a historian here. I don't really subscribe to a lot of history anyways, obviously. But I do know that around the time that you saw the civilization disappear, you're seeing the rise of electricity and the light bulb. And you're seeing the abolishment of the Teslas and the rise of, his competitors who are, now monetizing electricity. So that could be another major threat here to a society that's using what I would call plasmatic energy, which they probably had some sort of alchemy, chemistry, and science into creating energy sources from steam and water. That's another thing that I'll point is underneath all of the major pyramid systems, there's always aqueducts and underground currents of water, which I find to be significant, or they're near water. So we know that water can be used in a lot of ways to generate electricity. Maybe they found a way to harness raw energy from steam as well as a vapor. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a historian, but I do like to theorize. And I think that whatever they came up with was threatening to a rival faction or another continent or country that they were at war with. And if there is some sort of shadow government that doesn't want people using renewable clean energy or having access to, natural cures, I think that they have the ability to silence and suppress people, both individuals and entire civilizations if they need to. I think that they're powerful enough to do that. And that's what I think that we're dealing with here, based on all of my research and my weirdo out there belief structures that I have about the way things work in our society. That is my opinion of the Tartarian Mud Flood of the 1800s. That is the lecture that I prepared for you guys. I know that it's a little sci-fi. I know that it's out there, but we have a lot of people who are interested in the concept of aliens and life on other planets, and we have many people who are familiar with ancient Atlantis and ancient Lemuria and Agartha and all of these breakaway civilizations. I just think that the Tartarians are an aspect of that. They're another example of a breakaway civilization that was just wiped from our history books because they were a threat in some way, shape, or form. They were eliminated. And that's what I got, Garrett. What do you think about that?
I think it's heavy, man. I think that there is some strong, ideas there where it matches a lot of other things said, a lot of other theories and conspiracies out there as far as connecting dots. I think that, it has certainly, filling behind it. It has things that could make it very plausible. I have looked at the opposite side of this as well. I had listened to another .com page and podcast that's out there and found some interesting information that they had put out. And let me pull that up. That is Skeptoid.com and the Skeptoid podcast. They had done something on the Tartaria or Tartaria, however you want to pronounce it. I hear both. On the mud flood. And they had some interesting points. But before we jump into that, I did want to tell the listeners out there, this isn't just completely, even if it were to be wrong, it isn't completely false, because Tartary or Tartari was a blanket term used in Western European literature and cartography for a vast part of Asia bounded by the Caspian Sea, the Ural Mountains, the Pacific Ocean, and the northern borders of China and India at the time, when this region was largely unknown to European geographers. If you look at old maps, it does in fact say Tartaria on there, and it's quite interesting. It's above Asia. Now, this was listed as just a giant unknown chunk of that. Now, if something's unknown, you don't know what's there. Just like the ocean is very vast, it's still unknown to us, and we're still discovering species and things that we did not know exist. So for there to be an option of people out there, a race of people that might have existed that we didn't know about or that kind of live separately from us? Absolutely, because a lot of people right off the bat would say that's ridiculous. I want to ask you a question. How much of the world have you actually seen?
Facts.
Now, I know how easy it is to show you a globe, a map, descriptions, everything to give you confines to make you believe that the world is as big as they tell you that it is. But how does that make anything facts? You can think, I've been a lot of places, I've traveled a lot, but when you put those things together, even in the grand scheme of how large they tell us this earth is, it is an absolute grain of salt. Now, if it's 10 times, 15, 30 times bigger than that, how would you ever know? Only thing you are comparing it to is the, maps that they have given you or the maps that have been taught to you since a child. So in that regard, yes, it is on a map. It says that it was there at one point in time, and obviously eventually it vanished. Maybe that areas were claimed and they changed the name to it, sure. But how do we know that there's still not huge chunks of that well beyond what the map shows us? So that's one of the points I definitely did want to throw out there, that this isn't just completely something that someone made up. But with that being said, one really big point that I think that other podcast, that Skeptoid podcast, had really nailed is he did analytics of when this all of a sudden started hitting the internet. And interesting enough, it didn't hit the internet until December of 18 into January of 19 is when people really started talking about this. There was a few other small videos out there, but one YouTube personality out there, one YouTube person who had a channel, he wasn't even big apparently, had a video on the Tartarian mud slides and the racing of the civilization, and it only had a couple views on it. And then shortly after he had made that post, all of a sudden there started to be a lot of Google searches and other searches, and then it grew and it grew. His video jumped thousands of plays. All of a sudden it became this all of a sudden Facebook, social media thing that people started talking about. Now what this reminds me of is very similar to the Have You Seen This Man, which I brought up on other podcasts for other reasons, but tonight I'm bringing that up because before you've seen a couple people start to post about it, you have never heard about it before. All of a sudden, there was an internet frenzy, very similar and reminiscent to Slender Man. Yeah. So you have to look at these things that with the power of the internet these days, we can start something, get enough traction behind it, and before you know it, it's belief, it's theory, it's idea, it's being shared, it's being told. And that's the dangerous thing of the internet, is it can disturb and blur the lines. Now, I'm not saying in this case that it is, but I thought it was a very interesting point that they brought it up, that before December of 2018, there was only a couple searches ever done on it, and before that, there was never any. So it all of a sudden popped up within the last couple years. Now, one of the things I really thought was funny that they had mentioned is he had said in the show, and it made me laugh, that this is to be believed that there was giants living in this city, but yet 2 meters of mud, which shouldn't even have killed most people. I mean, yes, some definitely would have died, but wouldn't even have killed most people because they could have climbed on top of their buildings or shelters and things of that nature, is supposed to have killed giants who it wouldn't even have buried in the flood of mud. So I thought that was a very interesting point as well, is it buried the bottom level of most homes. Yeah. Okay, it buried the bottom level. Most of them could have went to higher levels. People still would have survived from that, and giants easily should have been able to survive from that. So why would the 2 meters of mud wiped an entire civilization of people and giants, especially those with high intelligence who, had a lot of other means with instruments, with vehicles and things that we don't have now. So that's that. There's a hole that they kind of poked through there. The interesting fact on the opposite of that, though, would be the fact that during this time period, Nikola Tesla was coming out with very strong, very powerful revolutionary ideas to change how we used energy and electricity, how we could provide it for free to the nation and to the world. And this wasn't received or perceived well by a lot of people, because that is instantly millions of dollars in energy that can be, accruing money that can be sold in many cases to a lot of people across the world, and that would be gone now. So if you have this civilization that's thriving out there, showing off that they have this already, this technology, or maybe there's even a connection there between his experiments and this culture using it. Who knows?
Sure.
It could make sense that they would want to make that disappear, but then why? I mean, how in 200 years were they able to make anybody that still was living not talk about it to their children to talk about it to their children? That is a massive, massive cover-up in a 200-year span to have made erased up until 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting.
So that's where I look at it as my big point on the opposite swing of that is it makes sense. Yes, the time, the experiments, the energy that they would be using, a lot of things that, evil powers out there could capitalize on and make money from if they destroyed and buried. Now, was it that they buried them? They were the ones responsible for somehow causing this mud flood, or did they just know how to capitalize on a very unfortunate event for their opponent? I don't know, and that would be the question to ask is, was this something they had their hands on and did and covered everything up, or was this just an accident that they used to their advantage?
Sure. They're good questions to ask. They're fair questions. And let's speculate a little bit on this. I want to try to look at this from my metaphysical perspective, because I think that it opens more doors. Let's see. When something relevant comes into our life, like I was telling Garrett, I just got a kitten, a 5-week-old kitten last weekend. And I wasn't expecting that to happen. But I trust that there's something relevant about getting this kitty and raising it and, being its family now. And I don't have the answers for that, but I trust the relevancy. So let's flash back. My mother lives on the West Coast, and she's big into conspiracy theories, and she's big into alternative, information. She came to visit. This was, I want to say, coming on 2 years ago, year and a half. And we're driving around, and she looks at this building, and she goes, "Hey, Daniel, did you hear about that concept that there's evidence that a whole society was buried underneath the mud, and that whole buildings and cities live underneath the mud?" And I was like, "No, I've never heard of that. Not even once." And being as weird as I am, you'd think that it would have come into my awareness at some point, but it didn't. So she tries telling me about it while we're driving around in the car, but I gotta be honest, I just generally wasn't interested. It just doesn't seem like, I slipped right back into that sort of like hive mind where it's like, if we don't know about it in the mainstream, then it probably isn't real. And whatever my weird thing that my mom was into, I was like, "Yeah, Mom, that's cool. I mean, whatever you say, could be. I don't know, And I just went back to like driving, and so I dropped it. But she seemed pretty interested in it. So then, flash forward, this guy adds me on Facebook a while back, a couple months ago. And he seems cool. He's into alternative information, alternative news. And he, every day, guys, every day, 7 days a week, this dude posts a picture on his Facebook page. And it's one of those Greco-Roman cathedrals, one of those, old architecturally stunning buildings. And he says, "Research the Tartarian Mud Flood of the 1800s. 7 days a week he posts one picture of it, and he has that tagline. And I seen it, and when I said mud flood, it made me think of the conversation with my mom, where she tried telling me about this a year and a half ago, and I had no interest. So I'm seeing this guy's posts every day, and I still didn't pull up Google and do any research. I didn't ask anybody in my sort of alternative networks of people if they'd ever heard of it or had any information about it. I just bypassed it again. Flash forward again. I catch an interview online with somebody that I respect and enjoy their content and their information. and they're doing a whole episode about this Tartarian Mud Flood stuff, and they're talking about it, and they're coming at it from a perspective that I resonate with, and I'm listening. Now it finally has my attention because it's coming from like a tried and true source of information that I go to on a regular basis. That's what it took. After my mom telling me about it, and this guy literally, putting it on Facebook 7 days a week for the last couple of months on my Facebook, this finally got to me. And I was like, wait, I'm genuinely interested in this. And then I start researching. I start doing, my work. And this gets me back to the concept of relevance. So if something comes up in your field of awareness, okay, there's something relevant for you to explore there. There's something for you to investigate. Might not be a big deal. It might not have a lot of longevity or a big shelf life in your reality, but there's something there that you need to hear. There's something there that you need to see. And so this mud flood thing keeps coming up, right? My mom, the dude on Facebook, then this video from these interviewers that I watch. And I'm like, wow, okay, I'm really into this. So then as I finally commit to this concept, I'm reaching all of these other points of interest that I resonate with. I do believe in ancient Atlantis. We've talked about it in the past, and I could talk about it again. I do believe in ancient Lemuria. I do believe in Agartha. These are breakaway civilizations that we have evidence of their existence. We have people who have stories about these things and their technology. We just don't subscribe to these because they don't exist in our history books. If a certified scientist from Harvard didn't release a formal statement that this thing is real, people generally don't agree with it. They don't subscribe. They don't take it on as their own reality. And that sucks that, a scientist or a historian has to, give us this fact-checked documentation of, their opinion before anybody will agree to it being real. The reason why I'm going off on this is because I didn't care about this concept. And obviously, I pushed it to the side until it kind of just forced itself right in front of me and said, investigate. There's something here for you to explore. And once I finally gave it my time and my energy and my focus, I realized that it had a lot of interesting things around this concept that I resonate with and that I believe in. So that was a big rant I went on, I know, but my point is that there's something relevant to when it became into public, Garrett. If nobody knew about it before maybe 2018-ish, 2019-ish, why did it pop up suddenly in searches and then it hit the collective consciousness and then it's just sort of like spread like wildfire? Okay, so why? Because there's something relevant to explore. So what is it about this Tartarians that was so threatening to the Cabal that they had to kill them or annihilate them? Well, I know that if you believe in the concept of ascension, our collective consciousness is expanding as a race. And so what happens when humans reach a new level of consciousness, new information that always existed but that was hidden before becomes revealed. It now this thing that was so big and cataclysmic that you couldn't have possibly gone your whole life never having heard of now comes into your awareness because we're reaching a collective consciousness where something important like this is ready to surface, in a sense, rise from the ashes or rise from the mud and be something that we can investigate. So if you look at some of the key points that I mentioned in my lecture about what they were known for, possibly having transcended the ability to eat physical food, that seems pretty interesting. Possibly being able to have flying vehicles or using free energy where their light bulbs in their street lights didn't have anything hooked up to them. That seems to be pretty interesting. So maybe we as a collective consciousness have the relevant need for this information, and that's why it sort of surfaced, like Skull Island, an earthquake happens and all of a sudden this island rises from the ocean that we never knew existed until now, but now there are all these new things to investigate about this new shiny thing. And I was also thinking about one question that you posed where it said, okay, well, a lot of these buildings look like when they were flooded with mud that only like the first story was buried, maybe even the basement or the first floor was buried in mud, how could that kill all these people, especially if they were giants? Well, I'm weird. And my response to that would be, it's symbolism. Okay? The mud and the water didn't kill anybody. No, practically speaking, it probably wouldn't. Even if it happened very suddenly, it likely wouldn't have killed an entire civilization of beings. I think it was more so symbolic that the mud and the burying of their culture and their race was the symbolism, and that they were probably executed in another way. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, I'm theorizing here, but if they didn't eat food like we do, that they were actually able to absorb the plasmatic energy from things similar to like a Breatharian, maybe their food source was taken away, or their ability to generate sustainable plasmatic energy was instantly neutralized with like an EMP or something, right? And then they starved. I mean, I'm theorizing here, but I think that if the mud was minimally invasive to their cities, that it had to have been symbolic. And what do I mean when I say symbolism? Well, I believe that all of the beings depicted in Egyptian on the walls, of the structures and in the scriptures, I believe that those beings existed, okay? But I don't believe that they looked like dogs. I don't believe that they looked like cats. I don't believe that they had wings. I think that there is a language here similar to the language of dreams and the language of lucid dreaming, that everything happens in metaphor and symbolism. So when we see these beings depicted from ancient Egypt having wings and the heads of animals, I think that they had attributes. I think that they had characteristics of those creatures and beings, but I think they were actually fundamentally humanoid. And let me give you an example. All of the beings that were depicted with wings, I bet you that they had ships. I bet you that they had aerial craft that allowed them to fly. So maybe those beings didn't physically have wings like a bird or an angel the way that they're depicted, but that they had crafts, and that the language of that scripture and that everything that you see and those depictions was speaking almost metaphorically or symbolically. That's why, people who analyze dreams, I've talked to some fascinating people who have sort of deciphered the language of dreams. That's why when you're going through something strange in a dream and you wake up and you're like, well, what the heck did that mean? This circumstance that was playing out seems so far-fetched. It wasn't about what was happening for face value. It was about what the circumstances you were in the dream, from a symbolic, metaphorical perspective. That's where the mystery and the clues are. And it's called dream speak. So I think, not to go off on another tangent, but dreams, I do believe, have a language in its metaphor. So when it comes to our ancient depictions of things, I think that they were over-exaggerated by what the abilities of those beings were, which were probably godlike in a sense, from human to extraterrestrial. I'm sure what they were capable of doing through their technology made them look like angels and gods, and so they were depicted as such. Same with their height. Okay, all the depictions of like the beings in Egypt, and they're much larger than human. I think it's symbolism. I don't think that they were necessarily giants, although they could have been large. I think that their abilities and what they were capable of achieving in front of a human made them seem larger than life. Just something to think about. So, that's sort of where I'm at with it. I don't have the answers for everything, but I do try to look at things outside of the box, and I don't rely on the lack thereof information. So what I mean by that is, if a scientist or a historian has made a formal statement about something that we now assume as our reality and we accept it as fact, I don't necessarily believe them just because they said that about history, or just because they said that about medical science. Same goes for the lack thereof. If a scientist never told us about this healing thing, or a historian never told us about Tartaria, I don't necessarily believe that it doesn't exist. That's kind of the way I look at my whole life. I question everything in such a radical way that it's like, it's sometimes even hard for me to get a sense of what is real, and maybe you got to back me up on that in some way here. I know you're kind of into the shit too, but that's my rant,
No, I like it, man. I want to piggyback off a few points there, both for and against. Once again, I think it's a great way of thinking about it. Some things about it that certainly stand out. So you had mentioned, and I want to actually back up for a second because I said something earlier, and after I said it, I meant it from the opposite perspective of how I said it. When I heard how it came off, I was like, that doesn't sound right. Okay. What I meant, folks, is when I said, did they get their technology from one another, I said it backwards. What I meant was, did Nikola Tesla somehow find the hidden books in workings from Tartaria and use their information for the technology that he created? And both their city was, and civilization was wiped off the face of the earth, and he passed away, and his plans were stolen and vanished from the face of the earth because they tried to erase it before. Somehow pieces of history always still remain. No matter how much you try to destroy a culture or civilization, there will always be something out there that can be tied back to it. And as long as there's something, it's still kept alive. So that is, certainly interesting with that his plans were taken. Maybe there was a reason for that. Maybe it wasn't just that they were amazing. Maybe it was because it was tied to something much bigger and much more. So I definitely can see that. As you mentioned, the lost city of Atlantis. Atlantis has always been something fascinating to me. It has been talked about in a lot of old ancient grimoires. It's been talked about in a lot of old ancient religious books, offshoots and canons of the Bible that are not included in the Bible, but religious texts, talking about this civilization that was advanced. Whether it was, a civilization that got up and left here, whether they were buried under waves and sunk to the bottom of the ocean, who knows what the fate was, volcano, it's hard to say. But there have been referenced many times, but that is actually, instead of being a positive for this idea, saying it could happen again, I'm saying it in the opposite sense, that how come it is so similar? Is it just repetitive? And the reason I say this is this has happened numerous times throughout cultures of the world, talking about very similar events with their own backstory to it, and they always make it sound great. And the biggest thing to support that would be religion. When you look at religions, they're all the same exact thing for the most part, telling different stories in different ways with different characters. Ultimately, great stories to tell a story. And when I think of this story of Tartaria, it makes me think of, obviously Noah and the ark. It makes me think of whenever the Grigori angels, the watchers of mankind, came down and slept with the daughters of man, and they created exactly what the name of my other radio show is, the Nephilim or the Nephilim. They created the walking giants, the half-hybrid angels and half-hybrid men that wreaked the world and were powerful. Now, it was a little bit different than this. It wasn't technology. It was knowledge and strength, because the Grigori angels not only had these giant children, but they also came down and taught the Son of Man how to make weapons and how to fight, how to use makeup, how to use astrology and geography. All these things that God did not want taught to the sons of man were taught by his own sons, and it made the race of human beings too smart. This sounds crazy, and this isn't, folks, is only coming from my perspective. This is coming from a non-Christian viewpoint, but what I mean by this is that was not wanted. We were not to become as smart as we were becoming, stronger, smarter, more intelligent, having technology of that sort at that time. And what happened? A great flood was sent to wipe the world of this race of pests that they have become.
Right, and it sounds symbolic.
It sounds symbolic. It's a symbolic thing. Now, you find years later, it pops up again and again and again. It pops up in other stories. Obviously the story of Enki and Enlil. It pops up in a lot of different, things throughout history that they all kind of tie together to, the same events. What are they symbolic of? Now,
Right.
that could, be a way of saying that maybe this is just a knockoff of that and it's a modern day spin on it. People aren't into religion as much anymore. So hearing about angels and the Gregory and all these things doesn't strike people the same way as it once used to. It's no far shot to say that churches and religions are suffering these days. If you look at attendance rates, they are much, much lower than they were 50 years ago. And it's going to continue to fall off because people are becoming more spiritually sound in themselves and waking up to certain ideas, no longer having to follow a construct.
Right.
But these stories might keep popping up throughout history again and again to symbolically tell people things. And what I mean by that is magic and occultism and a lot of the mysticism and mysteries of the world are shrouded in obscurity by symbols.
Yep.
In symbolism, and most people will see it as a great story or a pretty picture or a cool little diddle, don't understand what it's symbolic of, but for the select few that can understand it and use it to decipher the codes, there are a lot of things hidden within pictures and symbolism, within theological books like the Bible and the Talmud and the Zohar and different things like that, to stories like this of symbolism where there's something maybe hidden within the seams of it. So it's just very interesting, that could be the case. And this has happened again and again. Even think of the Egyptians; they had high levels of intelligence and technology.
Yes, they did.
And they used a lot of things that we didn't understand, at the time, and still don't quite understand. And a lot of their old tablets and hieroglyphs and artifacts were destroyed. And there's many temples that have been found where there's just smashed pieces of things that whoever the forces were, didn't want that to be seen because it may be told too much. They did depict pictures of anthropomorphic beings and intelligences. Now, this can be looked at a lot of different ways. This can be looked at as aliens, ETs, higher intelligences, interdimension beings. It can be looked as daemons or spirits, angels. They are all tied in similar outputs and stances, because this also makes me think of the Goetia of Solomon and the 72 demonic beings, and it talks about him building the Temple of Jerusalem with the help of the beings and using the Ring of Solomon. Now, the reason I bring this up is he used, through the help of these daemon spirits, a worm. The worm, it was called the shamir. The shamir was a worm that was used to cut through any type of substance, stone, rock, didn't matter. It would cut perfect lines and dissolve stone blocks. And it was given to them by the help of the daemons, and they built the Temple of Jerusalem, using these different spirits. That is energy weapons. That's some type of technology that no one in history has ever been able to figure out what they were speaking of when they talked about the shamir. It was this demonic technology given to them that they used for purposes of building block that no one ever seen or heard from again. But why was it mentioned? Obviously, there was something there at one point in time. It's a very strange fact to throw out in an already strange book. He's working with demons, and all by the way, he has this thing that can cut through any type of material. Didn't relate to the rest of it. So there's a lot of pieces that pinpoint that throughout history there was heavy technology. I mean, if you look at the pyramids, if you look at the Sphinx, if you look at the coast of Japan and you go down to the bottom of the ocean, there is a temple that they have discovered on the outskirts of Japan that is made of ginormous columns of stone that are cut so beautifully that we couldn't even do today easily. They could only be cut so precise, which seems like it would be some sort of laser. Now, this is amazing because this pyramid is under the ocean. So somehow this thing was built. No one knew about it for all these years. It was built to standards that today could have a hard time even doing. And it's been under the ocean for a very long time. Now, with water levels, they have said that it would be one of two things. This was either built underwater, which makes it even more insane, or it was built at a time before the water levels would have been where they were at this temple, meaning that it happened and was built before man was said to even have existed.
Right.
This technology, this civilization, these temples were erased until recently found. So we can say, yes, it is just an internet idea. It is just an internet craze. But at the same time, there is also out there physical proof of these things that have been erased. That if you would have said 20 years ago, a temple under the ocean, people would have laughed at you. But now it's been found. So we gave a lot of good points tonight, ladies and gentlemen, back and forth for the, for and against column. What do you think? What ideas do you have? We would love to hear from that. You can send that to celestialoddities@gmail.com or message us on Celestial Oddities Pair of Normal Guys Facebook group page. We would love to have you add us on there. We talk about a lot of strange and fun things. You can add your ideas, thoughts, your encounters, your theories on there. If you have any idea of what you want to see us do with the show, not do on the show, anything in between, or any guests you would like to see us have on the show, please, hit us up on our email or our page. Let us know. We can check it out. We will always get back to you right away. We are happy to be in Season 2 this year, guys, of this wonderful show, talking the best in supernatural on podcasting. If you love it, please let us know. Give us a ranking on Facebook. Share it with your friends. And other than that, that's all I had for it, Dan, too. I think that's a great place to end it on, is that, even though we went back and forth, we seal it with the deal that there has been proof. Atlantis, all these things, yes, we talk about, but these temples outside of Japan really seal the deal. I think that is it really pinpoints that no matter what we think, it is definitely a possibility.
Listen, guys, I'm going to leave you one thing I'm going to send you off with one thought, and it's the concept of relevance. Garrett, I absolutely love what you said, man. I love what you said about the technology and making that connection between the theme here. Atlantis used crystalline technology. Ancient Egypt used light and sound vibration. Tartaria used steam and plasma. The theme here is technology. Okay? If you look at our society now and the technology that we have access to and that we're using now, if you ask me my personal opinion, I think it's very, very primitive. It's nothing compared to what we see in the movies. So the theme here is the technology. Why is that being suppressed? Why does this theme of the flooding come back? It comes back to a matter of relevance. I told you guys that I ignored the concept of this Tartaria until it was right in front of me and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I think that it's rising from the depths of our consciousness as being relevant for our collective humanity to investigate. Why is this technology being suppressed? Why don't we have access to the things that they did? Something to think about. It might just be relevant for us all.
No, I love it. Well, folks, before we jump off here tonight, we hope you enjoyed this episode and what we had to say. We want to tell you a little bit about the upcoming episodes that we have coming for you soon. Next episode will be May 27th. We are going to be filling that with an interview slot that we're working on, and we don't want to currently speak until we seal the deal on some things, but be watching out for who will be on that episode May 27th. Following episode, June 10th, we will be talking about the topic of the man from Taured, which is a very interesting subject as well. We think you guys will love that. A guy coming from a country that is said doesn't even exist, yet he had all the documentation, and they couldn't find the loopholes. So make sure you tune into that episode. June 24th, we have another interview episode. We are bringing on urban shaman Lepus Rex. He is an energy healer. He is an exorcist. He is a ceremonial practitioner. Does a lot of things with energy work. We will be talking about them all three, but certainly digging deeper into the exorcism side. July 8th, we have Organism 46b as a topic of discussion. Several of our listeners asked for that specific one, which I have been digging into. Very interesting. I didn't know anything about it until it was suggested, and then we got several people suggesting it, so very interesting. And then we have July 22nd, psychic medium Tara Rene Buntelio. I don't know if I'm saying that right. If I'm butchering your name, I apologize. It's a hell of a name. But she is a psychic medium who I've watched some of her work before and it's very impressive. And then later in the season, we will be bringing the episode Daniel and I are very much excited to bring you, which is Missing 411, which, if you've seen the documentaries on Netflix, phenomenal material there to dig into, dive into, and theorize on. So a lot of great stuff coming for you this season of Celestial Oddities. It's always a pleasure, Dan, to work with you, talk with the fans out there, and share our ideas. Tonight was no different, and I guess we'll catch everybody next time.
Peace, guys.
See you next time on Celestial Oddities. Have a great night.